We are now going to have the second keynote presentation. We're happy to have Dr. Linda Bowman, who is the President Emerita of the Community College of Aurora and Vice President for the Colorado Community College System, to give us a presentation on successful transfer for students. Dr. Bowman, please.
Hello, now it does. What an exciting opportunity to be the speaker right after a nice light lunch. So I'm extremely happy about that. I hope that I'll be able to help you stay awake, but it was delightful. It was wonderful for all of us to have that opportunity to talk and to reflect on what I think has been a wonderful morning. I do want to start out, we'll see if I can do this, to thank the hosts for inviting me to be here, to thank my colleagues from my time here in Hong Kong 5 years ago at the FSTE, to thank the Hong Kong America Center colleagues as well, and also to say that I am so proud of the work that has been done. It's just amazing to me, and I think that you all are inspirational for us in the United States as well. As you heard, I'm from Colorado, which is a nice dry climate, so while I may not look tall, I'm much taller than I am at home with my hair curled up in the Hong Kong weather. This is my Hong Kong look. Probably wouldn't even be recognizable to most people that I know. So these are the things that I hope will be our roadmap today during this talk, for us to talk a little bit about why transfer matters. Now, of course, you know transfer matters, but I want to talk about that a little bit from my perspective, which I think we share. Some of the principles for making transfer effective for students, the importance of partnerships, the kind of oversight that is required for us to be successful, to give you some examples of some other states as well as Colorado, and then we can finish up with the implications for Hong Kong. I'm calling this a roadmap because I think this is an important way for us to think about students and their journey. So I am charging all of you, even if you are a little sleepy, to be civil engineers. This is really a wicked problem and an important construction project that we have together to construct maps and roadways for students to be successful. So first of all, keeping with that metaphor, transfer is no accident. It's having students able to navigate and be successful on a journey through their education. And for students to be successful, things have to go really well, as you probably are aware. The student has to be at the center as we construct these roadmaps for them, and therefore we have to be extremely intentional about what we want the student journey to be like, and to design with the end in mind. So I say that you go to the end, you visualize what you want to happen, and then you work backwards from where we want to be and where we want our students to be. So if you think of the concept of on-ramps and off-ramps on highways, that's really how we think of transfer and we think about educational journeys in the United States. We are very well aware that for us to have a vibrant economy, we need people who are prepared at all different levels, who have different skill sets, and who are able to support our economy and our society together. So it's an economic development concept, and it is an opportunity to engage a broad segment of our workforce. We don't want to have students who either go to the university or they go straight to work. We need people who have lots of education, lots of skills, and have the ability to come in and out of higher education as well. We also believe that all roads lead to success, that pathways, and you all are using the pathways language as well, and I was happy to hear that pathways are very important for students to be able to navigate and be successful. And that we want students also to be able to be lifelong learners. So when I talk about transfer, we think generally about students who are what we call traditional age, 18 to 22, but the fact is, in the US, traditional age isn't really traditional anymore. People are in and out of the workforce and in and out of higher education at all ages. And that's a really important concept to keep in mind as well, that we want someone who is working at a particular job or in a particular profession, wants to perhaps promote or change careers to be able to come back into our system and to make it possible for them to navigate in that way. We do have really positive data about how successful students who transfer are when they move from community colleges into the universities. And you can see here, Davis Jenkins, who's at Columbia University in New York, is recognized as one of the leaders in research on community colleges and community college students at the Community College Research Center. And so he said students who transfer from community colleges to four-year institutions are generally well prepared for the coursework and for navigating college life. And indeed, in a study from 2009, we found that the students who go to community colleges and then transfer to our flagship universities do very well. They do as well or better when it comes to the grade point averages and the graduation rates as those students who started as freshmen at the universities. Now, what's really important to keep in mind is the students who go to the universities first are going through a very rigorous selection process based upon their grade point average, based upon testing. The students who come into the community colleges were open access. Anyone who may benefit from the education is admitted, though perhaps not to just any program. Some programs have different requirements, but as far as coming into the system, they're able to do that. So are you all still with me? How many people are still awake? Raise your hand. Okay. If you're not awake, raise your hand. Okay. Oh, I see no one sleeping because no one raised their hands just then. So I'm very encouraged by that. All right. So the research from the CCRC at Columbia University and from the Aspen Institute that's done a lot of research on community colleges and on our success rates, they actually came up with what are essential practices. And what's, I think, very validating for you here in Hong Kong is that you will see in these essential practices a lot of what you see in the book that was released today. What is a caution to you and to us in the United States is that it's not simple to implement these practices, and it's not simple to keep them going and to stay successful and to build upon success. So the three strategies we'll be talking about: making transfer student success a priority, creating clear programmatic pathways with aligned and high quality, two very important concepts there, instruction, and then providing tailored transfer student advising. So we're going to talk about those three in a little more detail here. So the first one is that transfer has to be a priority not only for the sub-degree level institutions, but also for the universities. And that's not an easy sell. You have to think about who are those willing partners. And I've learned after many years as an administrator that you have to figure out who are the people who really want to participate, who want to be part of solving that wicked problem with you, and making sure then that you move forward with those folks. And the people who are so resistant, there's some people you need to convince, you need to work with them, try to figure out how to bring them along, and there's others where you allow them to do whatever they're going to do, whatever they have as a priority, and not try to engage them, because it's simply too difficult and you waste a lot of your energy. But the leaders have to communicate that transfer is a priority for us. And if you don't have that kind of support at the top of the institutions, you're very unlikely to be successful. You also have to share data, and sometimes that's not so fun. Sometimes that's an embarrassing situation. You're sharing data about where you're successful, but you're also sharing data about where perhaps you have not been as successful as you wish that you had. And then you have to dedicate the resources that support students who transfer. What we found is that you can work hard, you can have all these agreements, you can have students who arrive at the university, and then what happens is they're just lost in the crowd. They don't have those best practices that we heard about earlier this morning from Professor Hanstead for those students who have a freshman year experience or whatever. Transfer students are just assumed that they'll be fine, right? They've been in college before, they'll be absolutely fine. And that's not true. They're navigating entirely new systems, often larger classes, different types of expectations, not in content and quality, but in the ability to navigate and the ability to relate to their fellow students may be different as well. And so this can't be a haphazard process. This can't be left to chance. You have to be intentional all the way. The second strategy regarding creating the programmatic pathways, you have to have clear course sequences. Now, if we had evolved in higher education to the point that we had clearly articulated what outcomes we expected for our students and what students need to be able to do, and didn't have to talk about course content, that's wonderful. Now, that'll be a great day when we reach that point, but in general, we are not there. And so we have to figure out what exactly this course contains and how it relates to courses at the other institutions. We have to have maps, back to this journey that students are on, that have clear information about what students' next steps are. We have to be sure that we have the rigor in all sectors. We cannot have an expectation that students will come to one institution at a particular place, be able to then take courses that may or may not be as rigorous and then transfer and be successful. That isn't possible at all. So we have to do that. We have to have extracurricular supports. That's very important as well. And we have to have the colleagues that work together between the sectors. I know that you have some excellent examples here. I know one example is seated right here from Baptist. But it's important that the university faculty and the sub-degree faculty are working together to define those outcomes for students that are agreed upon and that we know will provide students with an experience for which they will be able to go from one sector to another. Okay, the third strategy is all about advising. And one of the things that I think we do with students way too often is we assume that if we give them paper, or now send them to a website, that they'll be able to figure out. It's all spelled out there right for them, right? We have these beautiful websites, we spend a fortune on them, we're keeping them updated, and then what we find is that we have websites that are full of educational jargon. We use acronyms, and we use language, and we use all this different terminology that frankly makes no sense to our students, and half the time doesn't make sense to us either. As an educator, I can remember looking at materials from different colleges and universities with my own children and having trouble figuring out what the pathways were. Now, maybe that says something about me that isn't too flattering, but I think what it says is that we are so used to what we're used to, right? We know what we know, and others do not know exactly what it is that we're trying to guide. And with community colleges in the U.S. in particular, we have lots of students who are first-generation college, so they certainly do not have the experience nor have the family experience to help them navigate what are some pretty arcane ways that we look at things. The sub-degree institutions need to articulate those options, monitor student progress, and help the students develop their plans, both their academic and financial plans. The universities have to have dedicated personnel as well. Just receiving those transfer students, as I said, that is not adequate. That will not work for the students. And the best situations, advisors that start working with students long before they transfer are very, very effective. And advisors at sub-degree institutions and at the universities who work together and case manage and work with those students, that's even a better situation as well. Alrighty. Okay, again, if you're sleeping, please raise your hand. Or if you're sleeping, clap. You can clap. How would that be? Okay, good. Everyone's still awake. I'm impressed, aren't you all? I think that's great. Okay, so we have a huge problem in the United States, and certainly in the state of Colorado, where we have great policies around transfer, but far more students declare the intention to transfer when they start at our institutions than the number that actually do transfer. One of those reasons is that our pathways are not clear for students. And we don't ask for those early commitments, we don't help students figure out what it is that they want to do early on, and we don't make sure that students early on have successful experiences. So in their freshman year, if students are not accumulating enough credits, the chances that they'll complete anything are very small, and certainly there's virtually no opportunity that they're going to transfer. It will not happen. The other thing that's a huge barrier is that if there is credit loss when a student transfers. That's a waste of time and money for everybody, and hard to avoid unless we have those clear pathways that we have devised together. So, my advice to folks at sub-degree institutions in order to make good on what I would call the promises that are in the book is that you collect data on student supports and outcomes. Data are sometimes difficult, as I said, but they are our friend when we're making the case for what students can and should be doing. You have to have internal coalitions within your own institution where faculty and staff are committed to making sure that students are successful. You have to have those relationships with your transfer partners, and you also have to have improvement plans, because everybody has room for lots and lots of improvement, that's for sure. Just kind of keep an eye on myself here. As far as the universities also need to be collecting data on how well transfer students are doing. And far too few universities are actually doing that, because to date, not enough places are seeing part of the core mission, taking care of transfer students. We have financial disincentives for universities, especially in the United States, where a lot of our universities have huge freshman classes, those big lecture halls. Those are money makers for institutions. Whether the revenue comes from the government or comes from tuition or both, those are money makers. And so there's not a big incentive to say, well, we really want to focus on transfer. And right now, where our demographics, we have really declining numbers of high school students, which means we know we will have fewer and fewer students coming into post-secondary education over the next decade. There's competition and there's pressure, and you can always follow the money when it comes to what we're doing. It's also important for the universities to build those internal coalitions. It's wonderful to have some champions, but you have to have many champions to make this work. You have to build those relationships with the sub-degree institutions, so that responsibility is sub-degree to university. It's also university to sub-degree to build those relationships, and then again to have that vision and plan for improvement. And this all was adapted from the Columbia University work. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about what are some of the big goals that we need to have. One that few places have achieved, a few states, and in the US, you may or may not realize, we are very different state to state. Our educational policies are state-based. We do have a US Department of Education, and the financial aid systems and some other things certainly are federal, but when it comes to policies, we're very much based state to state. So Common Course Numbering is a project that we in Colorado have achieved. Among our community colleges, we have Common Course Numbering, but our universities all have different numbering systems, which means you have to have a CAT system, as was discussed earlier here today. You've got to have that database of course equivalencies, because otherwise you might advise a student at a sub-degree institution to take this class, this class, this class, and then when the student arrives at the university, a department may be able to say, well, that wasn't exactly the same course, we want you to take another one. The student has wasted credit, and maybe even more importantly, the student is discouraged from the whole process. You need to articulate the general education core to decide what that core is, what it consists of, what fits into it. There's a book called The Paradox of Choice, and the name of the author has just escaped me, but it's an interesting book because it talks about how, and we've certainly done, and research shows that the more the more choices we as a human have, the more we are unable to make a decision. We actually become paralyzed by an excess of choices. How many of you can think about if you go to the store and you see just too many choices of cereal boxes, is one of the examples in the book. You're less likely to actually make a choice than if you just have a few choices and then you'll settle in on something. And so one of the things that we're trying to do really intentionally right now is to focus for our students on what should they really be learning? What do they need? And what works in partnership with our university partners versus this everybody should sample and dabble and try different things. That's wonderful. I believe in the liberal education, but the fact is taxpayers in the US don't want to pay for that. They're sort of tired of paying for that. They're not going to do it anymore. And students who don't accumulate enough credits on a pathway are so much less likely to graduate. And that's one of the tragedies that we're dealing with. Having major specific pathways and also field-focused pathways. Now, we have Associate of Arts and Associate of Science degrees. Both of those are designed for transfer. They're designed to be generalist degrees. And then we have the Associate of Applied Science, which would be more like a higher diploma, designed for people to be able to go to work. But the idea is to have these on-ramps and off-ramps so that students are able to perhaps take that first degree, for some students to go to work, and then be able to enter back into the system, or to take that first degree and then proceed right away into their second institution. When I say second institution, that isn't normally the case. We have a lot of what's called swirling of students, where they'll take classes here and then they transfer to another place, and pretty soon they have a bundle of credits, but unfortunately maybe nothing that applies towards a degree, and again, they're much less likely to be successful. Competency-based transfer maps is something that I alluded to a little bit earlier. We are talking a whole lot about what does it mean to be competency-based, to look at the capabilities that students have when they exit from a particular program, but also to be able to look at what students need to know. So you'll have things obviously in your major where you need that baseline knowledge that we talked about earlier, but also the ability to do and those experiences, which I think are really important from what we heard in the earlier keynote. Talked about transfer guarantee, having a wide transcript database so that we track students through their different college experiences is also important. So one of the things we do finally have in Colorado is a common number for students, so we're able to track students through the system. And importantly, we want to track students then into what careers they are part of. What are they doing? So we know where we've been successful, and again, we're holding ourselves accountable. And then back to, are those transfer students being successful? Very, very important. Okay, post-lunch, this is pretty tough, I know. I'm going to have you collaborate with your neighbor. Just right now, this is odd in this type of a venue, but just to your neighbor, tell them one thing that you've heard me say this afternoon so far. Just one thing, okay? Tell your neighbor, and then I'm going to come back to telling you some more. This is your wake up. Okay. And be honest, although I'm not going to hold you accountable, but if you say, I haven't heard a thing she said, you can say that. I won't listen, I won't know, it's not going to hurt my feelings, but just tell your neighbor one thing you heard me say. Yeah, one thing I said is right, hold up your hand if you're asleep. I mean, if that's what you heard, it's what you heard. I'm good with that. I ate that lunch too. I could barely stay awake. me. I appreciate that. Okay, so back to it here. The word collaboration is so important. And so the book released today is only a living document if people work together to make this happen. And so we found that it's really difficult sometimes after you've done all this work, you've started things, you've gotten them going, and then what you find is that one little change somewhere that you don't even know happened changes the whole system, and suddenly students are having trouble. It's very, very difficult to keep things going. And as a college president for 19 years, I've had more times than I should admit where someone would say to me, well, we don't do that anymore. And I think, when did we stop doing that? I had no idea. Nobody told me. Or I would hear, oh, well, we do such and such. I think, when did we start doing that and why? That's terrible. I mean, it's costly, nobody uses it, or whatever. So institutions tend to drift along. Somebody has an idea, then that person leaves, we don't use it anymore, or nobody, just someone made a decision or failed to make a decision, right, to carry on. That can happen in these extremely important discussions. And collaborations are very difficult because when a key collaborator moves on, goes to another institution, or moves to a different department, or promotes somewhere, suddenly you don't have somebody to talk to. It happens a lot with business and industry partnerships. We have a big focus in career and technical education, and in our Associate of Applied Science degrees and our certificates to have advisory groups and to work with business and industry. And what happens, unfortunately, is the champion for something leaves and you start all over again. And people become discouraged and things fall through the cracks and suddenly you're not doing them. So these collaborations have to be institutionalized. It's great to have those personal relationships. It all begins there. But then among all the institutions, among all the collaborators, there is then this responsibility to figure out who else to engage so that these become practices that are, again, priorities for all the institutions that are involved. And that's really difficult. Leadership and governance matter. Now, I know, again, because of all my years as an administrator, I've been in the they category many years. I've had plenty of those conversations where someone would tell me that they said we had to do such and such, and I'd say, well, I'm president of this institution. Who's they? I never said that. I don't. If I said all the things that I have had attributed to me, first of all, I'd have never had a wink of sleep. There wouldn't have been any time to do that. And it would be just impossible. But you do need leaders and you do need policies to make this happen. And so what we have found in our experience is very interesting. Colorado and Florida are seen as the best policy states for transfer. Florida has incredible results as far as the number of students who transfer, and Colorado does not. It's lagging. So we are not adequately implementing our own policies. And so that's a caution that I offer to you, that all this good work, you don't want that to be for naught. You don't want students to not benefit. You have to have frameworks that not just encourage, but ensure compliance. So the Colorado Department of Higher Education has a website. They have a list of the transfer agreements, the articulation agreements. They have the names and numbers of people for students to complain if they have problems with transfer. Students don't even know what the Colorado Department of Higher Education is. They don't go to the CDHE website to complain. They get a no and they're discouraged and they don't transfer. And so you really have to think about these systems and how they truly work. And as I said, we have disincentives within our systems financially often for making transfer work. So figuring out how do we instead build incentives. Goodwill's great, altruism's wonderful, caring about students, that's all wonderful. But when it comes to competition for students, when it comes to lean times financially, then sometimes all those good wishes, unfortunately, are not enough. So you have to have government, you have to have frameworks for monitoring success, and also for being an advocate at those levels where the money flows and comes into our systems in order to help us. Okay, let me keep going here. So, I've already talked to you about Colorado and Florida. There are other states. Actually, over 75% of the United States have transfer policies. But when it comes to the implementation and the success rates, they're not great. Ironically, though, as I said, the student success rates are incredible. Students who persist through the first degree, and many don't. Many will take a few credits and then they'll transfer on. They're not as successful in transfer. The students who complete that first degree, who demonstrate their own ability, and who are able to have a safety net in case life gets in the way and they can't transfer right away or can't complete the second degree immediately, their success rates are impressive. And that's what we want to ensure that people are able to do, our students are able to do. In Colorado, I mentioned the Department of Higher Ed. We have what's called the General Education Council. That's a representative from each of the colleges and universities in the state, the public institutions, and some of the private institutions participate as well. And these are the folks who sit and look course by course, deciding if something fits the big list of transferable courses. Now, this is where our paradox of choice, unfortunately, has gotten in. So we have thousands of courses on that list. It's too many. And everybody's pet course, they know if it doesn't have T next to it, that it will transfer. The students aren't going to want to take it. But the fact is, we've done too much good work there. Those are interesting discussions. I've sat in on this council many times. It's tough work, it's hard work, it's sometimes boring work, it's sometimes contentious work when it comes to looking at all of these courses. But that's a statewide effort and involves people who are provosts generally and vice presidents for academic affairs for the institutions who can make those decisions. And so that part is very important. The degrees with designation, essentially that's a 2-year degree. It's a terrible, awkward term. It means a major. At the time that this was put into law, and it's actually state law, that we would have these transferable degrees in different fields. The universities did not want the community colleges to use the word major. We since have figured out that that's not actually articulated in the law, so we're just quietly saying major to students because the students need, I hope you won't tell anyone in Colorado that I said that. But students need to identify with where they're going to be and what they're going to do. Just as they need to be able to identify with the institutions they will be attending later. They need to think of themselves as English majors or psychology majors or engineering majors. They need to think of themselves as going from this institution that I love to another one that I also will love as well. And then we also have a system called reverse transfer, so that if a student does leave a community college, transfer to a university before being granted the associate degree, and then takes the equivalent courses at the university that would fulfill the requirements for their associate degree, then the community college can grant the degree to that student as a reverse transfer. And that's a fairly new system that has come into place. So I'm not going to actually go to these links, but I just will, tell you a little bit about them. I just want to check my time here. We're doing okay. So the highered.colorado.gov, that is the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And so all those transfer policies are articulated there. And then specifically within that particular website, the academic/transfer/students, that's the student part of the website. You go to that and you will think as a student, this is the most boring thing we could do, and I would agree with you. I think that we have a long way to go. But it does let students know what their rights are and what they're able to do to transfer. And then I want to talk to you about a couple of models. One in particular is the Red Rocks Community College and Colorado School of Mines model. Has anybody ever heard of Colorado School of Mines here? Yeah, several of you. So Colorado School of Mines is a public university that everybody in Colorado even thinks is private. It's actually the most prestigious, the most difficult to get into of all of our public universities in our state. And they're primarily focused on engineering and the hard sciences. Students want to go to School of Mines, and often they don't have the grades for it, or they don't have the money to do it. It's more expensive than most of our public institutions. Just lots of reasons that you can imagine that they cannot get into School of Mines. And so probably 20 years ago, I worked at Red Rocks at the time, we were able to have a collaboration between the faculty of Red Rocks and School of Mines for students to gain admittance to Red Rocks, which is open enrollment, it's open access, take the prescribed curriculum, actually have some mines faculty who would teach some of the courses, and have one School of Mines class that they would go take at the School of Mines. They're in proximity, they're in neighboring towns. And then if a student has a prescribed GPA, that student is able to, upon graduation from Red Rocks, have guaranteed admission to School of Mines, which is a big, big deal. That's the kind of exemplar that you build upon. And School of Mines has since made arrangements with the other the other four community colleges that are in the Metro Denver area, and some of those that are outside of Denver, to have these same arrangements. But that was based upon faculty to faculty, provost to provost, president to president, wanting this to happen. It was an opportunity as well for the Colorado School of Mines to bring more women into their institution, a traditionally male institution with those traditionally male kinds of programs, and also more ethnic diversity as well. So, as we said, students have to be able to understand their pathways, they have to be able to have support to do this navigation. We have to engage them across the spectrum, and we have to have a system where students can have those on-ramps and off-ramps so that they can have second chances. It's a purposeful journey. It's a purposeful journey for the students as well as for the institutions. We, again, cannot leave things to chance. The transfer, beautiful agreements, beautiful websites, all of those things won't magically enable students to be successful. You have to be very purposeful every step of the way, starting with the student and thinking about exactly what that student's journey is going to look like. And so I think that you all have done this incredible work. As I said, I'm so proud to have had even a tiny association with all of you as you've done the work over the last many years now. But the implications, as I see them, are that this work is never done. And every time one institution makes a change, a curricular change, then everyone has to be brought in to understand those changes and to meet them. I can remember being in, this was an unpleasant meeting, to tell you the truth, it's sort of a bad memory, of teacher education faculty trying to say, we want transfer to work for students. We want students who are in community colleges to be able to transfer into the universities to become teachers. And there was such a battle between this university and that one, or this one and that one, among all of them. And what we were saying is, if you will tell us what you want our students to be able to do, and what you want them to know from their first 2 years experience, and then hold us accountable that our students can do that, that they will be successful, we will measure up to that. And then in the third and fourth years, you can distinguish based upon your own individual missions for your colleges and universities, what it is that you want your graduates to know. But for our students to be successful, you have to articulate to us, and we have to develop together what it means for a student to be a graduate of both our institution and yours. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for staying awake after lunch. That's a tough one. You all did a great job, and I appreciate it.
And it takes 4 years, but we know there's a lot of gap years or gap semesters or gaps everywhere. And on this road, how do you build that into effective transfer when a student wants to transfer, but in the meantime take a semester off because they have to do something. Is the system capable of keeping those kind of students engaged and on track? Or is that a way to say, well, then it falls apart?
Well, first of all, the question is if students take a year off, take a gap year, are in and out of school, does the whole transfer, the 2 + 2, fall apart? We do know that a student who persists, who takes a full-time load, stays on track, is far more likely to graduate than a student who takes time out, goes to a reduced load because of work or whatever. So those are factors that impact whether or not a student will be successful. But we also know that if we're able to help students persist through that first degree, and then they want to take a time out, a work time out, whatever it is, and then come back into the system, that we have to be very deliberate that we've designed something so that they can re-enter. And that gets back to having all the institutions sort of in on any secrets. You can't sort of have this new program or change the curricula or any of those things without engaging those partners so that students have a way so that they can re-engage. But community colleges in the United States, really just in the past few years, some of them are offering some applied bachelor's degrees. That's been very controversial about mission creep and whether or not community colleges should be offering bachelor's. And they're in prescribed areas generally. They're designed for work and they're designed for that associate of applied science degree for students to be able to transfer into them. And for students to not necessarily go straight into that BAS, Bachelor of Applied Science, but perhaps to go to work first and then come back in the system. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Linda.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk about the American system. I've got 2 questions. In Hong Kong, when students articulate just in the years, right, a lot of the admission panel at the DB sector, they tend to have preference for students who have current DSE results or public examination results that are not too far back. Right? They want it to be like, they're a bit suspicious about taking too much time off before continuing that. That's my first question. Is there any kind of preference? For students, okay, sorry. And my second question is there an expiration date for transfer credits?
Yes, so on the first one, first of all, the community colleges are open access, and so students do not have to have any particular test scores. There are programs for which the access isn't open, and those are competitive programs, but actual entrance into the colleges is open for anyone who can benefit. Now, that means we have students of all ages who come in, and there is sort of no statute of limitations there. For transfer, though, there often is a limit, but generally it's 10 years. And there's also the opportunity, though, students can take exams, like a credit for prior learning exam, to demonstrate that they understand the material and that they do not need to repeat certain courses. Or CLEP exams, which does exactly the same thing as far as a student's placement. So, again, lots of on-ramps and off-ramps into the system, but sometimes we give people so much latitude, I think it's too much, and we get back into that paradox of choice where we need stricter rules to help hold students accountable to themselves so that they will stay more focused on the journey.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bowman, and thanks for the question. Now we would like to